Hey guys, welcome back to AIDS Exchange. I haven't done a video in a little while and I gotta be honest, I've missed you guys. I hope you had a great new year and I'll give a bit of a channel update at the end of the video. In this video, I want to talk about what's been happening with the Russia-Ukraine sort of war crisis. I want to talk about what's going through Putin's mind, what the probability of war actually is, and what I think the economic and ultimate global impacts are going to be. So stay tuned and we're going to do a deep dive into this quite possibly harrowing and sort of world-changing subject. We'll see how it goes. So I'm not sure if you have familiarized yourself with what's happening with the Ukraine crisis, but I want to go back into the history books. The fall of the Berlin Wall happened in around exactly 1989, 9th of November. But even before then, the Soviet Union was collapsing. It was only Soviet Union versus NATO, US, and European forces. The Cold War, we all know about it. Now, in the late 80s, Soviet Union was already falling apart. The other member states, other countries such as the Ukraine and Poland and Georgia, because of how bad the economy was in the Soviet Union and the level of dissatisfaction, lack of freedoms, the other member countries of the Soviet Union were quite displeased, let's just say, with how the Soviet Union was coming together. So in that time, the Soviets as well as the Americans were actually having negotiations about, what would happen if the Soviet Union sort of split apart and what would happen with the dismantling of the Berlin Wall. Now, there is unwritten agreements between NATO and the Western powers as well as Russia about certain areas after the Berlin Wall fell, which were sort of inaccessible, off limits. And so there was a bit of, this is implicit, it's in memoirs, it isn't like every politician used to say this, but there is no specific contract or agreement that they would not cross the River Oder, which borders Germany and Poland. So NATO forces are not supposed to cross that river, and vice versa, Russia is not supposed to cross that river if they want to attack Europe. Now that has largely been respected. However, the issue is that NATO has been encroaching further and further east and has been trying to build influence within Ukraine and been giving them political, economic support, as well as military support. And so right now we are seeing the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. And because Ukraine is right next to Russia and very close to Moscow, which is on the western side of Russia. Russia is huge, but Moscow is very close to Europe on the western side of the country. And so this makes Russia very, very uncomfortable, and it's perceived that it's basically a violation of these unwritten agreements that occurred in the late 80s and early 90s during the fall of the Soviet Union. And indeed, that this has been an encroachment towards Russia. And people would like to think, yeah, Russia are the bad people and we sort of demonize Putin. But the reality is, the issue at hand is that the Western forces are on the border of Russia. Russia is not on the border of the Western forces or the US. So that's where the issue lies. So what's going on in Putin's head? Well, Putin is a master strategist, tactician, let's just say. I was going to say strategician, but he's a master at playing the game of chess, at the game of geopolitics, at just military tactics. So he realizes that at this point in time, the West is actually quite weak. The West has been suffering from COVID, as has everywhere else, but the West has not dealt with it very productively. Supply chains, inflation, just weak economies in the West. And this is and also highly dependent on Russian energy too. So he knows that as economically the West is not very strong and has dependencies on Russia. The other thing is he knows that the US is currently being led by Biden, who has shown himself these days to be a very unpopular president. I think he's only got an approval rating of 28%. He is not really performing well with inflation and a lot of core issues in the country. Afghanistan is the main one. It showed his military incompetency. He couldn't pull out of Afghanistan without being a global embarrassment. And I've done videos on how bad that was. And you'll probably see footage on screen. Now, he knows this. He knows the US has a weak leader in terms of military-wise. And that has actually led to also other sort of partners and allies of the US losing confidence in, the Western system. So economic issues, we've got a weak leader in the US. There's COVID, which has led to economic and political devastation for the Western powers. In my view, Putin is seeing this as an opportunity, either to get Ukraine off the idea of allying with NATO or actually invading them. Now, I personally believe that he is putting an ultimatum right now to the West. Either get out of my backyard or we're going to go for a war. Can you manage a war with us? Now, the truth of the matter is, Western economies have been completely struck down. We're losing faith in the US. We're looking at a political system that is completely divided with Republicans and Democrats, left and right in the US particularly. We're looking at military failure. We're looking at just a disaster on the economic front with inflation and supply chains. The economy is just breaking apart. Putin could actually do something and get Ukraine with his 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. He could actually take Ukraine if he wanted to. The question is, are the West going to defend it? If the West are truly going to coordinate and defend Ukraine, who technically is not in NATO yet, then they will have to look at the prospect of a real war heating up into World War III. And Russia still has a lot of nukes, tens of thousands of nukes from the Soviet days. I'm not sure if they've dismantled all of them. They've got a lot of nukes. If this war truly escalated, they will take it nuclear. So Putin isn't really that worried with taking a war to its fullest extent. What does the West have up its sleeve to combat Russia? Well, they've got economic sanctions. They can kick Russia out of the world financial system. They could stop Nordstream, which is the pipeline that runs from Russia through the Scandinavian countries into directly Germany. It skips the Ukraine. And it's been a massive project to get natural gas into Germany. Now, this is where the Germans are showing reluctance to participate in this possible war. The Germans are not sending military support. They're not offering military support at this time. They're reluctant to take Nord Stream 2 offline, which would mean they would have insufficient natural gas to keep their citizens warm and the economy running. They don't want that. So the Western powers are currently quite divided. And then we bring in the prospect of what happens if, who's going to join the war? Will China join the war? And the answer is quite probably. China will sense an opportunity to join the war and then attack and invade Taiwan. And then eventually perhaps expand that military power across the Asian Pacific. Because this would mean stretching out the US forces between Asia and Europe. I don't believe at this point in time the US can handle a war, a major world war on two fronts. It's too economically and militarily weak. It's barely holding on to its financial system with high levels of inflation. And then we talk about the Western powers as well as the Eastern powers that are allied with the US. Let's go with, I've already talked about Europe. Let's talk about Asia. Let's say you have a US that's split between a war on the Western front in Europe, fighting Russia, and then on the Eastern front, trying to fend Taiwan. Now, the US, let's say half of the US fights in Asia. Now, you have Japan, who only had the ability to invest and develop a military in the last couple of years because they were banned from creating a military since World War II. You have them, you have Korea, which has a strong military presence from the US because they're always on guard from North Korea. And then you have probably a few smaller allies in Singapore, perhaps. We're not really sure of Singapore. Singapore's kind of a technocracy, kind of like China too, in terms of political freedoms. So they're kind of a neutral player. So you don't really have that much strength in Asia. It's only Korea and maybe Japan, and that's kind of like a toss-up. We'll see how much they developed their military in the last couple of years. I don't think so. So China can actually take the Pacific if the US is distracted with Europe, and vice versa. If you can only have limited forces in Europe, then Putin is a master tactician. He would be able to play the European states against each other because he has leverage over their energy needs. As well as he does make the deals quite sweet in terms of economic cooperation. So, and on top of that, what is the value of Ukraine to Europe? Ukraine seems to always need European support. And it's sort of part of this agreement 2-3 decades ago where Europe or NATO would not encroach onto Russia's backyard. That really isn't their territory. So why poke the bear? Right? It's none of their business. It's not, Ukraine isn't that valuable to Europe. It's not like it's a gold mine or an oil field. It's, what's the value of it, right? So, you know, there's no real justification for why they need to get Ukraine on side, as well as encroach onto Russia, particularly as these countries, most countries in Europe and across the world are struggling to deal with COVID and the economic effects. We've got enough problems already. But if you're Russia, if you're China, you can sense the weakness and the lack of cooperation between these other global powers. And perhaps you could say they're more united than ever. So this is the lay of the land. And when I look at the different possible scenarios, I can only see this. See, either Russia invades and they take Ukraine, nothing happens, or they put so much power, influence with this ultimatum of war with 100,000 troops. Ukraine doesn't have that much. That Ukraine backs off and backs away from the idea of siding with NATO. That's my most probable scenario. Now, let's say that they do invade and then the Western powers actually fight this war. Then China would start the war on the Eastern Front. And then we may see China would actually get a lot more than they bargained for in the East. And perhaps Russia would get some support from China fighting the European front. Now, they're not going to continue the fight and take over all of Europe because this isn't the Soviet Union back during the Cold War. This is just Russia. Russia has an economy the size of Italy, New York State. The economy is nothing compared to the economic size of the other nations and other of the West. So they're not going to do that, but they can seriously threaten harm, such as with nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. So, you know, the European powers have a lot to consider. What do they have to gain by pushing their agenda with the Ukraine? what do they have to lose if they want to participate in this war? That's the question. There's not much gain. There's a lot to lose, and they're gonna have energy cut off, and their economies are also going to suffer. Who wins, right? And what I perceive, if there is a real war, it's not there will. I believe we'll end up in a stalemate. But what happens is it destroys the credibility of the Western forces. And so we really have set up a world that is ready to be taken over piece by piece by the alliance of the Russians and the Chinese if there is a real war. Now, I believe the most likely scenario is that Ukraine will fold and Russia will say, that's fine, we'll keep our side of the agreement and we'll take away our troops, and that's pretty much it. But what's really interesting, I believe, is the timing of this. Biden is one of the his least popular stages in his political. He's in the absolute doldrums of his presidential popularity, and the response to COVID has been very disappointing. You know, he's got more cases of COVID than even Trump's period. People are extremely disappointed with the inflation. So he needs something to lift up, to distract.
Do you think inflation is a political liability?
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a bitch.
The truth of the matter is, this issue has been ratcheted up because of the West's actions, not because of necessarily Russia. Russia has been dissatisfied with the recent developments in the Ukraine over the last couple of months. So the question is, did the West start this? And I believe possibly yes. And if it's yes, then the question is why? And perhaps it is to distract the sort of politics that's playing out and that the West isn't really experiencing favor with. So a lot to digest in that analysis, but I truly believe that we will probably avoid war and Ukraine and the West will look like fools. But you know what? That's probably that's probably better than actually having a war, because many people are going to die, and we've just had COVID. Can we have a war too, a world war? I mean, that really be fulfilling the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I mean, we had the famine with the supply chain issues, I suppose, and we had the pestilence, the other horsemen with COVID itself, a pandemic, and now we have war, famine, disease, war. That's a lot. I'm not up for a war. I'm not keen for that sort of stuff. So I think that's the best scenario, and that's also the most probable scenario. But before I finish, I just want to go through the economic impacts of a war, or even leading up to a war. What happens during war? Well, Russia controls so much of the energy supply of the world. Surely energy prices are going to go up. And if you look at the stock charts, you will see energy prices are skyrocketing. And I've done a video many months ago about the price of oil. Now, yes, it didn't rise in a straight line, it crashed, but now it's coming back up even stronger than ever. We may be seeing $100 oil in no time flat, right? Probably by the end of next month. We'll see. Oil, that's one. Gold is probably going to go up. We're probably going to see high levels of inflation. If China joins in the war, what would happen there? China would have sanctions, and they would sort of only supply their own country. The world's factory would only ship to themselves and Russia and their allies. So all of our computer chips, all of the things that we depend on China for, that's going to be cut off. We will have even more supply chain issues. And supply chain issues are leading to the inflation that we're experiencing now with our currencies across the world, not just the US, in Australia, in the UK, everywhere is experiencing a lot of supply chain issues as well as inflation. That's why interest rates are going up, which, by the way, will likely crash our economies. So what does this mean? More economic pressure for you and I, right? We can be smart, maybe invest in oil or gold or something to hedge and protect our wealth. But we will be seeing, going to the grocery shops, prices going up. Clothing, prices going up. Empty shelves on the storefronts. it's not gonna be pleasant for us, let alone the soldiers who end up sacrificing their lives for this futile, unnecessary war. So, anyway, that's my thoughts for today. What do you think? Are we going to head into a war? Is it going to kick off World War III? Is it going to be Armageddon? Right? I'd love to hear what you think. Please, feel free to add your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear. And also, I want to do a quick channel update too. Now, by the way, if you like the video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. I do videos just like this on politics and finance and economics. All right. I'm just going to do a quick update on my channel. Obviously my last video was something like 2 months ago, and it's been a busy Christmas period and New Year's, and I really hope you had an enjoyable time with that. And to my subscribers, I really want to thank you for sticking along, staying along with the ride. This is not my full-time work, so it's very hard to compete with other YouTubers, but you know what? I love doing this, I enjoy doing this, and when I get the right time and energy and inspiration and message I want to bring on screen, this is my first point of call, and I absolutely love it. So I just want to say thank you. This year I'm going to get back into the game, and I'll probably be more finance focused, to be honest. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening in financial markets, and I'm getting into more trading again, and I'll be able to have a lot of things to share in that area. In the meantime, I thank you for watching, share, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you guys.